People say a man can break only once. But that day, on a cold sidewalk outside a quiet funeral home, a 70-year-old veteran broke twice. First, when he buried the love of his life. Second, when a uniformed officer shoved him to the ground and pulled the trigger on a taser, electrifying the grief-stricken body of a man who once risked his life for the very flag the officer wore. What the officer didn't know was that within 7 minutes, the street would shake under the boots of United States Marines. Men who had served with this veteran, men who owed him everything, men who were about to correct a mistake that never should have happened. This is the story of how a single act of injustice ignited a brotherhood, and how a broken old man reminded the world that honor never expires. It was supposed to be a small funeral, no crowds, no speeches, just a simple goodbye to Margaret, the only person who could calm the storms inside Daniel Hayes, a retired Marine who had served 3 tours and carried the ghosts of each. They had been married for 52 years, and her passing, quiet, gentle, like a candle losing its flame, left a silence that pressed against his chest like armor he could no longer lift. Daniel arrived early, clutching white lilies, Margaret's favorite. His hands trembled as he walked toward the chapel. He hated how weak he felt. He had fought in deserts and jungles, endured nights that froze the soul, but nothing prepared him for burying her. Inside, a few neighbors whispered condolences. Someone offered him a seat, but he chose the front pew, where he whispered stories only Margaret would understand: how he first saw her at the county fair, how she laughed at the wrong moments in movies, how she would always leave the porch light on until he made it home from deployment. After the service, Daniel stepped outside to lay the flowers beside the hearse, whispering a final goodbye. That's when he noticed the patrol SUV pulling up too fast, tires biting the pavement. A young officer stepped out, broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, jaw tight like he practiced intimidation in the mirror. "Sir, this area's restricted," he barked. Daniel blinked in confusion. "Restricted? My wife is in there." The officer's irritation sharpened. "You can't be here. Move along. Funeral's over." Daniel's heart cracked at the word, over, as if a lifetime could be dismissed so casually. "I need a moment," Daniel murmured, voice barely stable. But grief has a way of making people appear suspicious to those who don't understand it. The officer saw a frail man clutching flowers and mistook heartbreak for defiance. "Sir, step away now. I just want to say goodbye," Daniel pleaded. That's when everything spiraled. The officer grabbed Daniel's arm. Daniel stumbled, slipping on the curb, falling to his knees. The flowers scattered across the concrete like torn memories. The officer, panic flashing across his face, reached for his taser and fired. A crackle of electricity. A cry that tore through the cold air. Daniel's body jolted, collapsing as his vision blurred. The pain didn't hurt as much as the humiliation. Years of service, medals, scars, sacrifices, reduced to a threat on a sidewalk outside his wife's funeral. The neighbors shouted, a few recorded on their phones. The officer yelled commands Daniel was too shocked to follow. And then, through the ringing in his ears, Daniel heard a voice he hadn't heard in years. Dan Hayes. Boots thundered toward him. Strong hands lifted him carefully. And as Daniel's blurred vision steadied, he saw a uniform dressed blues leaning over him. A Marine, then another. Then 5. They weren't strangers. They were his brothers. And the street was about to learn what loyalty really meant. The Marines didn't arrive by coincidence. Margaret had been like a mother to dozens of young recruits over the decades. Every holiday, she and Daniel opened their home to Marines stationed too far from family to travel. They fed them, listened to them, treated them like their own. So when word spread that Margaret had passed, several Marines decided they wouldn't let Daniel face it alone. They were running late, until they heard shouting from outside the funeral home. The first Marine to reach Daniel, Staff Sergeant Lewis, froze when he saw the taser wires embedded in Daniel's jacket. The man who once saved Lewis's life in Afghanistan was now lying on a sidewalk, shaking, gasping, the flowers crushed beneath him. The young officer stepped forward defensively. He resisted orders. "Back off now." Lewis didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Sir, that man is Sergeant Daniel Hayes. United States Marine Corps, 3 Purple Hearts. You just tased a decorated veteran outside his wife's funeral." The officer hesitated, but ego is a stubborn enemy. "I don't care who he is." He wasn't complying. More Marines surrounded the scene. Not aggressively, not threatening, just present. Unshakable. A wall of silent authority far older and deeper than the officer understood. Captain Ramirez knelt beside Daniel, helping him sit up. Dan, talk to me. You all right? Daniel nodded weakly. Margaret. I dropped her flowers. Ramirez retrieved the scattered lilies gently, arranging them back into Daniel's trembling hands. We'll fix everything. You're not alone. Not today. The crowd had grown. People whispered. Cameras recorded. The officer suddenly looked less certain, his voice cracking. Hey, he fell. I didn't. Lewis cut him off. You were given a chance to show compassion. You chose force instead. The Marines escorted Daniel to a bench. One placed his dress jacket over Daniel's shoulders. Another stood guard, not for danger, but for dignity. Within minutes, the patrol supervisor arrived, pulling the officer aside. The argument was brief but intense. The supervisor approached Daniel directly afterward. Sir, I am deeply sorry. This shouldn't have happened. Daniel didn't respond. He just stared at the lilies. Ramirez stood and faced the supervisor. We're taking Sergeant Hayes back inside. His wife deserves her goodbye, and he deserves respect. The supervisor nodded. We'll clear the area. As the Marines guided Daniel back toward the chapel, something remarkable happened. Residents who had been silently watching stepped forward, creating a quiet path, an unspoken tribute. Some placed flowers at the entrance. Others bowed their heads. For the first time that day, Daniel felt Margaret's warmth again. Not in the world he lost, but in the people she had touched. Inside the chapel, the Marines stood in formation. They saluted Margaret. Then they saluted Daniel. And Daniel, through tears, whispered the words he had struggled to speak. Goodbye, my love. Outside, the street was silent. Officer or not, no one dared disturb the moment. Because for those 7 minutes, the Marines didn't just take over the street. They brought back honor. They brought back family. They brought back hope.